What do you see when you look at this river? Is it a place so romantic that you want to whip out your paint box and set to work? Is it a route upstream to wild adventure? Or maybe it's a place where monstrous fish lurk, waiting for your dangling hook. Some have seen this river in more practical terms, as a highway downstream to market, as a source of drinking water, as a resource to exploit for manufacturing, or as a convenient sewer. None of these uses, however, have left any very visible mark on the valley. Still, other men did change the Clarion. They saw it as a wild thing in need of taming, and they built dams. In 1822, Pennsylvania authorized Thomas Peters to build a dam on the Clarion River. The Peters Dam, located near Turkey Run, was probably a low structure made of lumber and stone that raised the level of the river just enough to create a pool for storing logs. Back in the long ago, the Clarion was a heavily used route to the Allegheny River and hence to Pittsburgh. Each of its sharp turns, calm eddies, and dangerous rocks had a name. In 1953, some of the old-time rivermen got together with William Kissel and made a map of the Clarion as it was in the old days. The map shows places named Blue Rock, Grass Flats, Sow and Pigs, Red Hot, and Steel Trap. There are dams on it as well. Davis Dam was downstream from Alum Rock. Best Dam was on Sassafras Point. Plummer's Dam was above Turnip Hole, and Russell's Dam was near the Devil's Race Ground. In later years, there was also a dam just by the steel bridge that carried the main road across the river near Clarion. It was not a lot different than the Peters Dam at Turkey Run, just big enough to pool the river and make a stopping place for rafts headed downstream. Those small dams were good enough to handle the river in most seasons, but every once in a while they got clobbered. An especially cold winter would freeze the river for months, so that immense amounts of ice were created. Then, along about May, temperatures would soar for a few days, and all that frozen water came grumbling and scraping downstream and piled into the low dams. The ice paused, then cracked and stacked, pushed and moaned until the puny dams gave way and disappeared downriver along with the triumphant flood. Today, those old dams are long gone. All that remains are a few heaps of rock in the river, and some curious place names on old maps and in ancient yellowed newspapers. By 1900, the river ran free and mostly empty. The dams were gone, and the timber industry had largely switched to railroads for transport. One man, though, still saw the Clarion with a speculative eye. Cyril C. Crick saw that mighty flow of water through steep valleys and dreamed. Billing himself as an engineer, a discoverer, and an originator, he measured and calculated, planned and promoted for 30 years, and in the 1920s his biggest dream came true. On a chilly Friday in late October of 1921, businessmen and interested citizens converged on the courthouse in Clarion to hear all about the scheme. Their chatter filled the large courtroom on the second floor as the meeting was called to order. Byron R. Newton, former Assistant Secretary of the United States Treasury, was the first to speak. After the proposed 3 dams are created, they will make a lake 85 miles long, having a shoreline 600 miles long. This will aid materially in the cultivation of fruit, especially grapes, the raising of crops, and the establishment of summer or recreational resorts. All this is secondary, though. The Clarion River is God's bestowal on Clarion and Clarion County of a great gift of inestimable value. The carrying out of this project will open up a new era, a new epoch in this whole section of country. This will be the means of developing new industries to such an extent that it should become one of the great industrial centers of the country, perhaps the greatest. Lordy, lordy. Engineer Crick was the next to speak. He told of his long-held dreams for the Clarion River, and of how one dam would be constructed near the mouth of the river, another a few miles below the town of Clarion near Piney Creek, and a third just below the mouth of Mill Creek. After that, his talk quickly descended into a welter of figures about the proposed dams. Their lengths, heights, thicknesses of crest and foundation, volume of concrete to be used, time to construct, etc., etc. By the time he sat down, many in attendance had a somewhat glazed look on their faces. The third and last speaker was C.M. Hart, who had also for years been engaged in promoting this enterprise. The whole Clarion River project is being financed by H.D. Walbridge and Company of New York City, and regardless of whether the people in this section subscribe or not, the construction of the hydroelectric plant is going on. However, we seek the cooperation of the people of Clarion County and hope that you will invest in the construction of the dams, the power plants, and transmission lines. In a later age, there would have been howls of protest at this high-handed statement, but in that year of 1921, his comments were well received. The Clarion Democrat, in its next weekly edition, effused that this proposition brings within reach of our people the opportunity to share in this, the greatest project for developing this section that has ever been proposed or offered. By the investment of a little money in this project now, the people of the 60-mile radius may do more for this territory than it will be possible to do in the next century. Strong stuff, and the community agreed. By early 1924, Piney Dam, the smallest of those proposed, was nearing completion. It had taken a little over 2 years to build the awesome concrete structure and its nearby power generation plant. At one point, over 750 men worked together at the construction site, and work went on year-round. Meanwhile, since the backed-up waters from this one dam would flood the river valley for 18 miles, some adjustments had to be made upstream. The grand old P&W Railroad trestle over the river near Clarion had been built in 1877 and was believed to be the largest single-truss trestle in the world. It had not been used for 25 years, though, and so was torn down. The steel bridge near Clarion was raised so that its lower parts would not be perilously close to the water. Formerly, the roadway had crossed halfway up the bridge structure. After the changes, the road ran across its bottom. The flats along the riverbanks, although prone to flooding, had been the natural place to locate early roads and the small homes, shacks, docks, and shanties of people involved in the timber trade. All were torn down or abandoned to the coming permanent flood. There was not a lot of opposition, since by the 20s the lumber trade in the river had faded, and the dam was a wonder and a marvel that would bring prosperity to the whole region. Finally, the big day arrived. Every eventuality had been planned for. All work was complete, and it only remained to close the gates on the dam and watch the water rise. Clarion Democrat, May 29th, 1924. O ye fishes! Word was received on Friday in Clarion that the gates of the dam at Piney were closed, preparatory to filling the dam with water. Quite a number of men and boys, some ladies also, drove down to the dam and saw something most of them had not thought of before. On the closing of the gates, the water below the dam kept on running downstream, and the river soon became a number of small pools, and on investigation, it was found that the pools were well filled with fish of all kinds and sizes. There were tiny minnows, suckers, catfish, bass, pike, and big carp, the largest reported being over 3 feet in length. Men and boys were fishing with clubs and sticks and with hands. One party was reported coming from the water with his arms full of fish and at the same time driving others before him toward the bank. A number of fishermen from all the surrounding country and all nearby towns were present. Little regard was paid for the kind of fish caught as far as the fishing laws were concerned, and no doubt many had no fishing license. Piney Dam filled quickly, and soon the fish were able to roam the waters below the dam, as they always had. When the power plant began operation, nearly everyone agreed that Piney Dam was a success. It still is today, after over 75 years of operation. During that time, it has created billions of kilowatts of electricity, and the narrow 18-mile-long lake that it creates has been a source of mild profit and great amusement to the people of the area. The promised vineyards and massive industrialization of the region never materialized, but few people alive today even know that these were once promised. What of the remaining 2 dams? Well, they were never built. The Great Depression and World War II slowed things down a good bit, and the next meeting concerning either of them wasn't held until June of 1968. At that time, a coalition of local people and the Army Corps of Engineers were pushing for construction of the Foxburg Dam. But after a few months it was decided that the problems involved were too great. The river was heavily polluted, valuable coal and oil lands would be submerged, and the whole town of Cowansburg would have to be moved. So, Piney Dam remains the only dam on the lower Clarion River. Piney was built before I was born, and so it's been a constant in my life. As already mentioned, for years and years the river and the lake formed by the dam were heavily polluted, partly by acid mine drainage and also by paper mills and tanneries way upriver. Some fish still managed to live in its waters, though, and if we didn't dare eat them, that never stopped us from catching them. As a kid, I remember fishing the dammed-up water down near the steel bridge with Dad. We took along a big Scotch cooler and filled it with the many kinds of panfish that we caught. These were mostly very small, but it was always interesting to see their kinds and their colors. We would sit and fish for hours, and Dad would tell me stories of what the river had been like before the dam, and also tell me of the places where the water flowed off to in its long meander to the sea. At the end of the day, we would dump our wriggling catch back into the river and head on home for a dinner of nice grocery store fish.